I think you had a post that I really made me rethink a lot, which is rethinking the reptilian brain.
Yeah. The reptilian brain really is a phrase or an analogy or a metaphor, whatever is the appropriate title for it, that I just is one of my least favourite things in all of neuroscience, because I guess it's one of these, we talk about the seductive allure of neuroscience. People like all things neuroscience. 25 years ago, no one cared. Like, you'd say you did neuroscience. It was studying neuroscience for my PhD. No one would even know what that word meant. Now everyone's like hanging off neuroscience and wanting it to explain every aspect of who we are and how we think and how we feel, and it's going to answer every question that we have. And one of the ideas which has been popularized, which has come out of work by one guy back in the 60s, which back then people said that's not actually right, but somehow it kind of took on a life of its own, was this idea that we've got this triune brain, and our brains evolved from lizards into kind of basic mammals up into the kind of the primate style mammals that we are, and there were these three kinds of phases of development, these three layers of brain, and deep in our own brain is this kind of reptilian core, which is where all of our subconscious behaviours and impulses and urges and anything irrational emerges from. But when you sort of look at evolutionary biology, we didn't evolve from reptiles anyway. We evolved from a common ancestor and evolved in different branches of the tree. So that doesn't make sense for a start. Neuroscience doesn't support that. There's not these three layers of brain which are in this kind of hierarchy. That's not our current contemporary understanding of neuroscience. We have far more agency over our emotions than we think, because essentially our emotions are created in the moment from all these streams of data that are emerging hardwired from this little reptilian core, only to be controlled by our thoughtfulness that we kind of develop as these kind of rational, godly creatures. So that it just falls apart, and then it gets used by non-neuroscientists all the time to describe almost any aspect of the brain or behaviour that's not, I suppose, thoughtful. And I kind of, you know, I'll go to a conference back in the days when I used to go to conferences and people would have a picture, have like the reptilian brain, and it would be labelled, and it was always labelling a different part of the brain. And I'm like, no, you don't know. Just being used as a kind of a neurosplainer without any neuroscience, it's just words, just brain words people are using. And so I just want people to stop using it, because not only is it inaccurate in any scientific sense, and there's this great line from a neuroscientist, Lisa Feldman Barrett, who says the only lizard brain is found within a lizard. Or the only animal that has a lizard brain is a lizard. It is not our contemporary understanding of how emotions are created, and that is that they are created in the moment by all of these data inputs from our body and the outside world and our lived experience, and we have a ton of agency over that. I mean, if emotions emerge from a lizard brain, what would be the point in ever seeing a psychologist to help you manage your anxiety, because you wouldn't be able to do anything about it because it emerges from the lizard. You wouldn't be able to then learn to experience new positive emotions in the future. You wouldn't be able to, you know, that really cool idea where you can look up a foreign dictionary and learn foreign words to describe emotions you never experienced, and then you understand that word exists to describe a state, and then you can experience that emotion going forward. That's called, you know, we call it emotional granularity. You're learning like really fine-grained little words to describe smaller emotional experiences, and when we have an understanding and a label for those emotional experiences, we can then kind of learn and understand that emotional experience in the future, and you could then have an emotion that you never had before when you learn the word that describes it. Now, if the lizard brain was in charge or existed, none of that would be possible. So I just think it removes agency. It dismisses any ability we have to learn and grow and change, and it's just wrong.
So you think
it's just one of my little soapboxes to stand on.
Oh no, it was so helpful to me, because I've never understood it and I've never been able to make sense of any of it. And whenever something's too complex for me, I just always dismiss it and think, okay, I have nowhere to put this. But I'm so glad when I saw it, I thought, okay, that's why none of it made sense. So you think we should expand our emotional vocabulary so that...
Yeah, absolutely. Some really cool tools out there. So there are some online emotional dictionaries. There's one called the Positive Lexicography Project by a fella, I believe, called Tim Lomas, who's in the UK. I would Google positive lexicography, and he has been gathering all of these words from non-English languages, because English is really limited,
right?
Language, very limited language. And he's been gathering all of these different words from all of these different languages which describe particular emotional experiences. So the most kind of common one, which I suppose in recent years has come from another language into English, is that German expression Schadenfreude, which really describes that kind of
the pleasure that you take,
moment of pleasure you get when other people that you don't really like stuff up. There's this Dutch word that I learned years ago when I was back in the 90s, the good old 90s, called melig, which means flowery, and it's that feeling you get when you're kind of tired and relaxed and silly, and you just find everything that anyone says like totally silly, and you can't stop laughing, and you're all silly and giggly.
What is it called?
And that's just melig, MELIG.
Okay.
Yeah. And so you can go and look up all of these wonderful words in these online resources, and it'll give a name for a word for a feeling. And you go, so there was one, I'd have to look it up on my Instagram. I believe
I feel like Norwegian. That when I get super tired, that's exactly how I feel. I just
and you get all sort of silly and giggly, especially if you've kind of got a girlfriend.
Yeah.
So there's one, it's a Norwegian word. I'm not going to pronounce it. It's spelled, it's probably pronounced something like Jensensglid. But Norwegian people can pull me up on that. And it's called the joy of meeting up with someone you haven't seen in a long time.
Oh.
And I was like, oh, that's really lovely. And then there's this other word. These are some I've just put on Instagram, and I'm talking about emotional granularity, called started with T.
Especially someone who's a good laugher.
This is a word, I believe it's from, I'm not sure whether it's from the Philippines or Indonesia, called Tizita, and it's a bittersweet remembrance and longing for a time, person or thing gone by. So, there's all these words that we can, when you kind of get a frame for that, and what that does is it moves us beyond thinking that there's happy, sad, angry, disgust, these kind of wired and 7 basic human emotions, and that's all we've got, and to thinking, right, you come home from work and you're angry because of something your boss did. Well, you could kind of try to unpack that. And you can go and you can look up these emotion wheels, they're called, and you can look at them online, and it will help you take that word anger and divide it up into maybe 10 or 20 different kind of little shades of red. Are you feeling slighted by something your boss said, or are you feeling disappointed in them, or are you feeling blindsided, or are you feeling let down, or are you feeling there's a real deep sense of injustice? Or are you actually just hungry and they did nothing wrong? Are you embarrassed? Are you feeling shame? When you can then break that basic big block of an emotion down into something much more fine-grained and granular, then that gives you a much greater range of options on which to choose how to behave next. Because you remember I said the brain, whether it's certain or uncertain, is simply making a choice in any moment on how to behave next. And if you are giving it a word in as one of the data streams coming in to describe that sort of physical sensation you're experiencing in a place in a moment in time, you're then opening up a far more wider range of options in which to act on next. There's a big, and I think Brené Brown would say, there's a difference between, feeling regret and feeling shame and feeling guilt at a way that you behaved in the past. Regret opens up options for acting in a different way in the future. Shame really doesn't, and guilt really doesn't. So what word are you using to describe a state that you're in? Because that being very granular and precise about it can perhaps change how you'll behave next.
How do our relationships affect our brain?
Well, we are really these very deeply sensitive social creatures, and the social relationships we have with other people kind of key to survival. I mean, a baby can be fed and watered and kept its nappy changed, but unless it's got love and attachment, it is very clear. We know from, thousands of years of human experience and years of, scientific studies, and any psychotherapist or counsellor will tell you a baby and an infant born up without the love and attention and attachment, adults who care for it, whether that be its birth mum or, the people who loved and nurtured it when it was young, that child will have problems, mental health, physical health issues later in life. So from the moment we're born, that's what our brains need. Like the most important sort of indicator and structure that we can build around a person at any point in the lifespan, whether it be infants, whether it be kids going through puberty, teenagers. What happens if you are a lonely teenager or socially rejected teenager? So quickly, easily to spiral down into social, exclusion, isolation, depression, really, serious clinical issues, because teenage brains need other people.
Yeah.
You are moving away from your family of origin into a tribe. One of the strongest indicators in terms of outcomes of mental health of young kids going through puberty is the social context. So if you've got a little girl who's going through puberty much earlier than all of her friendship group, she's going to be far more vulnerable to develop mental health problems than a girl who goes through the same age as her friendship group. They're experiencing the hormones of puberty at the same time, and their bodies are changing, but it's that, how is my body changing in relationship to the people around me, that is actually more of a stronger indicator of mental health outcomes. Whereas boys are different, because the boy who goes through puberty before all of his friends, or he gets taller, musclier, hairier, and he rises in social stature, and he becomes like the popular guy, and he's actually protected. Through puberty at the same time as their friends are all right. What about, everyone knows the little guy who goes through puberty much later than his friends? They're the ones that struggle. Now, those boys, early, same age, late, are all experiencing pubertal hormones at the same time, but the mental health outcomes dependent on the social group and how they perceive themselves changing in relationship to their friends and that social interaction. So at every point in the lifespan, what does a new mum need? A tribe of support. What parts of the brain change during pregnancy? Significant structural changes take place in the social brain when you go through pregnancy, because Mother Nature's preparing your brain to nurture and to understand and to be tuned into the thoughts and feelings and needs of this little baby that you're bringing into the world. And, we only need to look in the end of life, what happens to poor old lonely people in aged care who are socially isolated, the mortality goes up. So, our health, our well-being, our mental health, our sense of who we are is intimately entwined up with other people. And we're starting to we all kind of know that, but now we're sort of starting to see what happens in the brain when social interaction is removed and brains don't grow healthy. It's damaging to brains. And what happens, what happens when we are in these kind of warm, social, healthy, you've got real rapport with someone and you're in conversation with someone. And, when you sort of say that idea, we were in sync or on the same wavelength, there's some really cool neuroscience research out now that can record from two brains simultaneously that are in a real conversation where you kind of, like we are, you're in sync and you're having this great conversation, and the two people's brainwaves will kind of sync up. Two people that aren't really kind of in sync, or it's a bit awkward or whatever, their brainwaves won't be in sync.
Wow.
So, our brains are like our brains are just these like sensitive social organs.
Yeah.
And that's why humans have thrived and taken over planets. It kind of promoted our sort of evolution in a way. How hard is quarantine?
Quarantine is really hard because of that, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, essentially, it's not allowed to be with other people. I mean, people are like willing to die to be in a crowd.
Yeah.
They're willing to sacrifice their own life to be with other people. I would rather be, we've just had the football in London, and, I'm sure tons of people were vaccinated, but there's pretty lots of people who weren't, who were willing to sacrifice their health and maybe the health of other people for that joy of being in a crowd, that collective, just joy of being with other people and cheering on their team. It's about the connection that we need. And all of the institutions, that's churches, religion aside, is around giving people sort of a sense of purpose and rituals, and but it's around that collective, purpose together, and that's what people crave when they haven't got it. And we see that. I mean, people are willing to set aside their own house to be with other people.
We've been in a state of anxiety since for the last few months, because a lot of the businesses, small businesses in the city, are dependent on people coming back to the offices. And so there was an announcement just yesterday. We were expecting, last week, Boris Johnson said he's going to encourage people to come back to the offices. And so all of the businesses around me are hopeful to be able to pick up where they left off, and things will resume back to normal. And so yesterday he's made an announcement saying that, because the numbers are going up, we kind of think people should stay home and not come back to the office, which the uncertainty has come back. I'm just wondering, that paired with recently I listened to a podcast by the Harvard Business Review group, and they had gone back to the office for the first time. And I think the guy, the editor, is maybe late 20s or something. And he was saying that they were feeling social anxiety about going back to the office and sitting around the conference table.
Yeah. Well, I can speak from the perspective of here in Australia, where we've had lockdowns and then we've gone back to normal and then we've gone back into lockdown. So, we're kind of a bit of a sped up version. And it's hard being apart, but then you lose, I think, social fitness. You almost get scared of being together because you've taken on this message that it's dangerous to be together. And I went to the musical Hamilton in a full theatre. We all had to wear masks maybe 6 weeks ago. And it was really weird being that close to so many people you don't know. It felt very odd, but the musical was so good, I kind of forgot about it. But it was really strange. I know here in Australia, and they've just surveyed 50 top companies in the country, and they're all kind of in this hybrid mode and it's kind of, I call it choose your own adventure. So they've sort of surveyed everyone, and everyone's like, we want flexibility. We don't want to be told we have to be in the office, but we don't want to be told we have to be at home. And a lot of the surveys have all come back saying, well, if we have to be in the office, maybe Tuesday, Wednesday, or Wednesday, Thursday. Like, everyone really wants to be at home on Mondays and Fridays, like that kind of extended weekend. And especially if you've got family.
Yes.
Hands down, it suits people with kids because it just gives flexibility, and it doesn't seem to be reducing productivity. But for many people, especially young people who might not have families and they might live by themselves, or they just want to get out, then that kind of choose your own adventure style, if it's COVID safe, works really well, because it gives people the option to choose to be with others if they want to be, to not. And certainly, obviously not every, if you work in a hospital or a school or in transport or retail, it doesn't work. But if you're in a bog standard old office job where you're sitting at a desk, you don't need to be there. But I think that there definitely seems to be a lot of support towards that. Atlassian here in Australia, which is kind of our biggest software company, certainly in terms of revenue, I think that they've said there's just 4 days a week, 4 days a year, 4 times a year when you have to be in the office. But the office is there if you want to be in it. And I think that flexibility and giving people the agency, saying, here's the framework we're working in, you find your freedom and your way of making it work best for you, and there is the best for everyone, because it's kind of how it should be. That old-fashioned Monday to Friday 9 to 5 was damaging, and unnecessary in a lot of cases.
Yeah, but it does mean that we would have to rethink everything, almost, for us anyway, because it's a big.
You had to but you had to rethink it anyway. We did it without thinking. I mean, it happened last year without having time to rethink it and plan it. So certainly here in Australia, and I'm speaking from the experience of Sydney, is most people are still I'm in my 40s, and so lots of people I know are, and most people have got kids who are their early teenage years, say. Unless, there's people that have got that are essential workers. Most other people are working from home more often than not, because they had to for 6 months last year, and it worked. So now the flexibility is there, and then we've been in lockdown now for 3 weeks, and everyone just went, oh, okay. So it was quite easy to kind of roll back out of the office and roll back into the home office. Everyone did that, and people are looking forward now to having that freedom again to choose. And I think that freedom and a framework idea gives everyone agency. And that's a fundamental need to be able to make your own call.
I think if it does that, then that would be amazing. When you say, that our brains are constantly developing, well, like that neuroplasticity is ongoing throughout our lives. And you think of, okay, we are going back to the office. And for example, in the case of the editor and his staff at Harvard Business Review, they said they ended up going into separate meetings to recreate the Zoom environment that had become comfortable. And so you think, what does this bode for the future?
I think you just get it. I mean, if someone has social anxiety, you kind of have to challenge that, right? You can't. Anxiety is constantly avoiding something that makes you feel uncomfortable, so you need to sit with that discomfort. Now, it's different if you're going in, if you were a nurse going into work in a COVID ward without PPE. I mean, that's clearly not safe, and your feeling of not feeling safe is completely and 100% rational. And you shouldn't be forced to do that. But if you're feeling nervous about going into a face-to-face meeting with 4 other people in a socially distanced boardroom with the windows open, maybe you just have to, take the small steps and challenge yourself to feel the discomfort and kind of work your way through that, because it's essentially you've got to kind of expose yourself, not avoid it. Because the more times you avoid it, then you keep reminding your brain that, oh, I worried about that and nothing bad happened because I didn't go there. So you have to expose yourself to that scary thing. And sit with the discomfort. And once you've done that a few times, then you come out the other side and you go, oh, well, I didn't die. I was actually okay. So it's really just building, and we were saying that at the end of last year here in Sydney, you kind of got to build your social fitness up again. You're just kind of getting used to going to parties and chatting with people face to face and talking to people you didn't know, and it was kind of had to learn how to do that again. And it was uncomfortable.
That's really helpful, the social fitness thing, because I think that is exactly what we're going to have to do. And I've been really conscious of that, even right in the early stages when there was a lot of uncertainty. I'd run into one of the moms and she was less scared, and so I was less scared. And so just kind of leaning into it. And I remember in July when they said, oh, children are going back and we weren't sure how this was affecting children, I was petrified. I said, I'm not sending my child. And slowly, because she goes to a really lovely school where the head teacher understood our anxieties and kind of, really gave us a choice and said, I am doing everything I can to protect them. and, you know, take your time if you want to stay back a couple of days until more children start to come in. And so she was very flexible with us, and that really allayed my fears. But I think that's the kind of thing that we might have to do going forward. And you say that consciously or not, that we use imagination to reinvent our past and our present and our future, and that our memories are not perfect. Can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah. Well, memory is a really funny thing because we think it's deeply reliable, but every time we remember an old memory, we kind of sort of bring it out of its box, and we kind of play with it, and we kind of almost shape and squeeze it and mold it, and there's almost a bit of a revisionist history going on with a lot of our old memories. Or, you know, the first time we kind of drag it out, we may kind of make meaning of that and sort of fit a little story around it, and then put it back in the box, and then bring it out and then share it with someone else, and they may kind of add their perspective, which may alter your memory slightly. So our memories are not always these perfect sort of high definition movies of what happened in the past. Some memories may be, but typically the ones that we bring out time and time again and kind of turn over and look at, we sort of shape and sculpt each time we do that. And they do change slightly, and that's kind of, I suppose, a really very human thing to do, that idea that we're making meaning. You know, we're using new words to describe the emotion that we felt in that moment. That sort of shapes and sculpts that memory, and then it gets put back slightly altered and stored in that slightly altered way. We don't really understand where in the brain that memories are stored, somehow in these networks which are constantly sort of cycling around the brain, because there's lots of different pieces of the brain you can remove or damage and not in any way damage memories. So we don't exactly know. There's not a spot there stored. It's more like a cloud network. There's no place. It's sort of everywhere. That's the latest analogy, only because that's the latest technological analogy we can use. So that's, you know, this very funny human condition that we have.
How does what we consume affect our brain? So, for example, things like reality TV shows, tabloid media, because I think a lot of young people are not growing up with the kind of media that older generations consumed.
That's the basic old newspaper, like the 90s. Oh, look. I think I have really mixed feelings about it, because life was much more straightforward when we didn't have all of that, and simpler and sweeter in a way. But then I think maybe every generation thinks that about the ones that have gone. But we've never lived in the infodemic that we live in now, and you know, sometimes it's lighthearted relief. You know, I like a little bit of Below the Deck. Or, you know, Grand Designs. I love, you know, Phil and Kirsty on Location is one of my, actually, it's one of my favourite stress-busting shows to watch. Is either Grand Designs or Location, because it's a deeply predictable narrative arc. You know, it always rains in Grand Designs before the roof goes on. You know, there's the same, and it's quite comforting. It's like walking the same path with just a little bit of variation along the way, and there's always a really nice resolution at the end. There's a little bit of tension, and then it resolves, and then at the end there's a lovely house, and I just find it so soothing. My mum taught me that, because they went through the Christchurch earthquakes. I don't know with people listening in, this is sort of 2010, 11, Christchurch, my hometown, nothing happened in Christchurch when I grew up. Like 70s, 80s and 90s, it once snowed, that was it. Then the last 10 years, Christchurch, they had the dreadful mosque massacre, they had the earthquakes. But my mum has lived through the earthquakes and was very, very traumatised, and they had to rebuild, and she had a really terrible time the day of the earthquake, stuck in a building. Horrible stuff. Her stress relief was to watch Phil and Kirsty. I think she's watched every one of these shows ever multiple times, because she says you just know it's all going to work out. And the predictability of that is not, there's no challenge, there's no surprise, there's no drama. It's just comfort. It's like comfort food.
Yeah.
And so I think sometimes we can use that just to soothe our soul.
Yeah.
And you know, I've heard that through the pandemic years, there's been people have really returned to a lot of those old sort of shows from their childhood or the past,
Yes.
where everything was simpler and more straightforward. Friends, the Friends reunion,
Yeah.
you know, all of that sort of nostalgic TV. I think we can get a real sense of comfort from that. I suppose reality TV, gosh, it's nuts. I was watching Married at First Sight. Do you have Married at First Sight in the UK?
Yes. Yeah. It's on Netflix, right?
Maps. Yeah. So we had Married at First Sight here, and it's just horrendous. Thankfully, my 13-year-old watched about half an episode with me, my 13-year-old son, and he said to me, "This is just a show on how to teach you not to behave in a relationship."
Oh, fabulous. Oh, what a smart
I was like,
one.
thank God. Yeah, I was like, yes, that's
Love Island.
yes.
Oh.
yeah. But he just thinks it's utterly ridiculous. And I was like, good boy, just carry that. Just keep thinking that way, mate. So
your mummy's a neuroscientist. You're not
they don't want to know anything about the brain because that's what mum does. So it's deeply uncalled, very boring, very annoying.
You know what? That's what my daughter does when I try to talk to her about meditation and calm your brain. She's like, "Mommy, do you understand that walking is a form of meditation?" That's why I got that.
Yeah. Your kids are not interested in anything you do. But then that's good because it means, as I say to my son, whenever he does things like that or just displays typical teenage behaviours, like, "Oh, darling, you're so developmentally normal." And he really, really hates me saying that. He goes, "You said about missing no." Back to me like that. And I go, that is such a developmentally normal response. Another thing I've learned from neuroscience is these predictable behaviours are usually quite healthy and normal.
Yeah, I think more what I was thinking is, do you think, so for example, the tabloid media in terms of like the news is really rewiring us to be really hyper and is really damaging to our mental health in the long term?
Possibly. I mean, I'm a bit boring. I only watch like the ABC. I listen to BBC Women's Hour every day and read The Guardian, so I'm not quite sure what is out there.
Yeah.
But maybe,
I watch your Sky News
Rewiring. I know I don't watch that either.
Oh, when I see that, I just.
Oh no! I just listen to the ABC and BBC podcasts. That's it.
That's excellent.
So I'm sure there's a lot of trash out there.
Yeah.
I mean, I suppose that's where all these crazy ideas get spread, and it's a bit disappointing.
Yeah. But so do you think that people should kind of be conscious of what they consume, or really we should just do what we can?
Absolutely. But I mean, who am I to come in and tell someone who's happily reading the Mirror that they should read The Guardian?
You tell us. You're a neuroscientist.
I think we can listen to BBC Women's Hour instead. I mean, that's coming from a position of privilege and education and snobbery almost.
Yeah.
I don't know whether that's the right way to do it. I just wish that those news channels would be more ethical, and they're gonna dumb down an idea at least to make it a real, honest, truthful concept. Maybe packaged up in a way that people want to consume media in different ways. That's fine. It's when it's inaccurate or false, and that's problematic. And you can't blame a person for not knowing how to be discerning.
Yeah.
Not everyone is lucky enough to have had the education I had.
Yeah.
It'd be nice if the media organisations owned that as much as the individuals.
So how, for somebody who just needs a bite-sized type of information, how can they be conscious to rewire their brain in the healthiest way going forward?
Do you want me to give you a soundbite?
Yeah, kind of.
Go to bed earlier.
Yeah.
I'm an absolute, complete and utter fan of sleep. I think, and I nap a lot.
And
I nap
naps?
most days as well. So yeah, I have a lot of afternoon naps, short afternoon naps, because that doesn't interfere with my sleep at night. I love going to bed, and I can smash out 8 or 9 or 10 hours easy. The only reason I wake up in the middle of the night is if my husband sneezes like a walrus or something. So I am a very devoted, deep lover of sleep.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think the other S is that sort of social connection, to understand that with these deeply sensitive social beings, our brains are sensitive social organs that need other people, and the greatest, the best thing for another brain, and also the worst thing for another brain, can be another person.
Yeah. Well, that's what I was going to say, because over here, I don't, maybe the same over there, but, these cases that domestic violence has risen, there's also so much that suggests that social interactions are not the healthiest way either. How do you
damaging? Yeah, well, that's why I say the best. So the most healthy thing for another, the best thing for another brain is that it could be another person, but it could also be the worst if it's toxic, or it's damaging, or it's stressful, because it's or violent. So a good, healthy, social, loving, caring, giving social interaction is the most important thing for another brain. That's what the brain needs.
You did a live with Andrew Huberman.
Oh yeah.
And that was such a fun live. I was just, it was just before.
He's a very old friend. We go back. We both went. It's so nerdy. We went to a PhD students' neuroscience summer camp, like summer camp in Long Island for neuroscience students back in like the summer. It was before September 11. That's how long ago it was. It was like June, July 2001. And then I met up with him again later that year. I've been to his, in fact, the only Thanksgiving I have had in America in my life is Mum and Dad's house. So he's a very dear old friend who's now smashing neuroscience out of the ballpark.
No, it is.
But he's always been a neuroscience superstar, and super smart and incredibly focused. But
yeah. No, it was just lovely to see that interaction. I think you mentioned is it a Norwegian word, but it kind of evokes that sense of emotion, just seeing both of you kind of go back and reflect on that time. I think there was a very funny story that you were telling about a time when you had a book. You'd picked up a book. Oh, that was so good.
He nearly ruined me. I think that was when I realised he was going to make it as a neuroscientist. Maybe I wasn't, like, in terms of getting a professorship. I picked up a book. We were in a science bookshop, and I picked up a book on alternative careers for scientists. And he said, that's the kind of book that failed scientists read. And I went, what? I'm not reading it. I just picked it up accidentally or something like that. He's always been like, he is like super focused and so smart.
Yeah.
But I'm really delighted that he's bringing neuroscience to the world, because he's a good bloke.
Oh, brilliant. Thank you so much, Sarah, for doing my podcast. Just been such a pleasure.
It has been. It's been a lovely conversation. I've kind of gone on all kinds of tangents.